Joining me now is season 4 apprentice contestant Marshawn Evans-Daniels. She's the author of Skirts in the Boardroom, a woman's survival guide to success in business and life, a reinvention strategist for women, and the CEO and founder of Godfidence.com. Good to have you this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So what we've heard from Trump supporters after seeing the Access Hollywood tape and now hearing about these allegations is that's not the Donald Trump I know. Well, you were on the show in 2005 when this was recorded, season 4. What you heard in that tape and what you're hearing from these women, is that the Donald Trump that you know?
Well, I would like to say that I didn't really know Donald in the way that I thought I did. I looked up to him as a mentor, someone who could be a positive role model and a business example. I was at the time a thriving, budding entrepreneur. But what I will say is that I did know a man who used profanity regularly. I did know a man who would compliment and talk about women in a way that was often odd and inappropriate at times. But the bigger issue for me is that, you know, there's always been this cloud of secrecy around the real Donald versus the public Donald. We see a public Donald who was entertaining on television, but we had to sign $5 million non-disclosure agreements when we were on the show as cast members. And I think it's interesting that we were told that if it didn't air, it didn't happen. And then I look back now and I see that anybody who really has been involved with Donald or the Trump organization has been required to sign very extensive and abnormally aggressive non-disclosure agreements. I'm a lawyer and I know that this was abnormally restrictive.
So how are you able now to speak out when we're hearing from people who were involved with the show that they cannot?
Yeah. Well, I can't speak to everybody else's contract, but what I will tell you is that mine was a $5 million, 5-year non-disclosure agreement. So mine ended 6 years ago. Others, they may be still withheld, still under the restrictions of theirs. But what I will say is that that there is a pattern. It seems like there is a pattern where people are being told to be quiet, not to speak out. I was personally even threatened not only by Trump supporters, but by Trump himself publicly in a press release that he issued, telling me to be very careful. And I think that now we look at women being told to be silenced, that we shouldn't believe them, and that there is this culture of silencing that's very dangerous when we talk about our government and constitutional freedom of speech.
You talked a little bit about the compliments in the boardroom and during the taping of the show. Flesh that out a bit for us. What did you see? What did you hear?
Well, you know, one of the things I've always known is that Donald is a casino guy. Yeah. And I used to manage pro athletes in the NFL and the NBA, and so I'm very used to being around men who talk about women. But what I noticed about Donald is that he would make comments that were inappropriate at really odd times. So if you're in the boardroom, you could be talking about business and wanting to be taken seriously, and he would interrupt you not with "that's a good idea" or a follow-up. It was more, "I like that blouse." So in the middle of conversation, it was just very odd at certain times. And so I see that actually during the debates, during the presidential debates, where all of a sudden there'll be something he's talking about and then he'll just randomly wander off somewhere else. But also it's interesting that he talked about Secretary Clinton's looks and whether she had the look to be president. And it makes me really wonder, when I was a contestant, were we being looked at or listened to, or were we really just being looked at? And then when we look at our Supreme Court, are we going to have a Supreme Court that looks like the Trump brand, which is what we were told. We had to dress so that we looked like the Trump brand.
Now, there are some supporters who, at least past supporters, who after the release of the tape and even after these allegations have decided that they're no longer with Trump, but they stayed with him through the proposed Muslim ban, through some of the statements about African Americans, through some of the release of recordings of his statements on women. And I understand you take issue with this being the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, one of the biggest deceptions is self-deception. And people are choosing to be oblivious. I've always said the gospel is colorless but not oblivious. And people chose to ignore Mexican Americans being attacked, Mexicans being attacked, the disabled, the veterans, people who look like me and you and others. They chose to ignore that. But it wasn't until one of our sisters who happens to be white was attacked. And I always have believed, unfortunately, I grew up in predominantly white neighborhoods and have mostly white friends. But there is a way that Barbie is protected by kin. And when that is disturbed and disrupted, America kind of stands up in a different way than it does for the rest of us. And the question is, who is worthy of fighting for? And there is a strategic political advantage to making sure that Caucasian women are that you have this there is a strategic advantage to making sure you have the support of Caucasian women. It would be very hard to win the presidency without them. And so it's very interesting to me that it wasn't until that a white woman was talked about in a disparaging manner that all of a sudden now we have outrage. That's hypocrisy, and that's something that I find shameful and cowardice.
Well, the conversation now is there a difference between the Donald Trump of 2005 and the Donald Trump of 2016? We appreciate you here coming here to speak with us about the Donald Trump you knew in 2005 as we look ahead to the election in just 24 days from now.
It's so important to stay awake.
All right, Marshawn Evans Daniels, thank you so much.
Thank you.